research group there that are doing all kinds of good things, and she's going to introduce Jean Litwiler, their speaker, the next one that you will hear. Welcome again, Dr. Sarah, if you will, please.
Sometimes there is an opportunity for somebody like me to be associated with someone with a great open mind, a great grasp of primary energies and knowledge, someone who keeps a very good repertoire of knowledge along with a great deal of common sense. And I think that no matter how much of a genius anybody can be, if they don't have some common sense and be able to apply knowledge to specific conditions and get the records, keep the records, and be able to share what happens with other people, then we can't very well call them a real research scientist. And the man I want to introduce today, I have admired greatly for his work with our instruments. He is a farm consultant out in northwest Illinois, and the things that he has been able to document and share with us have really gone far beyond what most of them do. We have some outstanding people that we work with, people who use our equipment and whom we call our research associates. And as one of these, I am very proud today to introduce to you Jean Litwiler. He has some very interesting things to tell you, I'm sure. Jean?
Thank you, Sarah. With that introduction, I'm really excited. I want to hear what's going to be said. And you quoted it just like I wanted you to. I want to welcome everybody here this morning. And I'd like to make a comment on the Reverend give the book away on the reincarnation. I had a hard time with this term and whether I believed it or not, until a few years ago when I found out that all lawyers come back as mosquitoes. This gives it much more credibility. I'd like to know a little bit who I'm talking to this morning. Are there anybody in here that is an employee or associated with the government? Would you stand up and give your name and your position? Thank you, John. That includes several of us. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my background first so that you know that Sarah just didn't sweep me off the street. I have been in the farm business and been a farmer, been associated with farmers all my life. In 1949, I joined my father in a grain feed and fertilizer lumber business that my grandfather started in 1884. I kept my farm, and as fertilizer come in, I was all excited about the things that were being developed. And as the chemicals come in, I was all excited because I thought, boy, no more flies, no more weeds. Well, after about 7 years and finding out how bad they lie to you, I had turned it over. My father had retired, and my son went in business with me. And you know, if you got any sons, well, you know what happened. He got to the point where he knew more than I did, so I turned the business over to him. And then I went and got interested in the natural way of doing things, which answered an awful lot of questions that I had when I was in the conventional way of farming. I want to tell you this morning of some of the things that I have had experience with some of my customers. First of all, I have developed a hay program that I'm pretty proud of. In the state of Illinois and in the state of Wisconsin, which there's quite a little dairying in Wisconsin and northern Illinois where I live, the average production of alfalfa hay is 4.8 ton per acre. And where maybe the university thinks this is great, and they do think so, because I went to a meeting one day and a fellow from the University of Illinois spoke and was going to talk on increased hay production. And so I thought, I'm going to go and I'm going to learn something, because I'm always interested in increased hay production. So I went and I listened to this gentleman, and he said that when he got done he would answer questions. And so I was right there, and I asked the first question. He talked on putting as much as 1,000 pounds of muriate of potash per acre on alfalfa. And this just horrified me, because I was paying part of his salary. Anyway, when he got done, I asked him about the calcium level and that. He said, well, we want a pH of 7. I said, that isn't what I asked you. I said, what is available soluble calcium? Well, they didn't know what that was. They didn't pay any attention to that. And so when we got done and visiting for a second or two, he decided not to take any more questions. Well, anyway, I have developed a hay program to where if a man will follow my recommendations, I can guarantee that the first year he will have a ton increase, and within 2 to 3 years I can get him up between 8, 10, maybe even 12 ton per acre. Some people say, well, you know, maybe you get the extra hay, but maybe it isn't any good. It's kind of like a friend of mine, Mark Moeller, some of you know him. He was at Arkansas and was at one of the fairs. And he was looking at this hay. The man had just got done judging it. He was from the University of Arkansas, and he just got done judging the hay. And Mark was with a friend of his, and they were looking at this hay, and Mark said, I don't see how anybody can give somebody a blue ribbon for this hay. It's got hollow stems. And the gentleman from the university come over and overheard him, and he come over and he says, what's the problem? I mean, what don't you understand? Mark said, I don't understand how you can give this man a blue ribbon. He said, this hay's got hollow stems. And the man from the university said, why, absolutely. He said, don't you understand how hay grows? You have to have hollow stems so the air goes up and down in that stem. Well, the kind of hay we raise is got solid stems. To prove the quality of it, I was working with a farmer, Clarence. We developed this program by trial and error on his farm. And how I got acquainted with him, I was giving a talk one night at a meeting, and Clarence sat in the back of the room with his arms folded, you know, and just sat there, you know, he's just defying everything I said. He knew it was a bunch of baloney, in which sometimes it sounds like it. And I could see him, and I thought, you know, I'm going to get that guy someday. I mean, I could just see he was just defying everything I said. Well, the second year he come to the meeting and did about the same thing. He called my wife afterwards and asked about, he wanted to talk to me, and I wasn't home. And he said, well, I want to talk to him a little bit. He said some things at the meeting I don't believe, but I want to talk to him. And she says, well, she says, I can't answer any of your questions too much. She says, I'm not a farm person. But she said, all I know is before I met Gene, we used to have to dig things out of the garden, and now we can pull them. So Clarence wanted me to come over. So I come over and talked to him. He wanted to try 20 acres. And I said, fine, we'll try it. I said, I'd like to have half of 2 different fields. Well, he didn't want to do that. He just wanted one field. And I said, no, I won't do it. Well, by golly, it's my money. I'll spend it the way I want. I said, fine. I went and got back in his truck. And when he seen I was serious, he said, well, okay, I'll try it. So we sprayed his hayfield. Now, what I use, I like to go out early in the spring, and up there, that's usually real late in March or 1st of April. And I like to put 2 quarts of Basic H soil conditioner on, plus energized water. Now, I energize this water with a autonomous instrument, and I like to find out what the plant is looking for. I used to just value what I thought should go on there and put on there, and then I got myself in trouble one time because I put too much calcium on, didn't bring the phosphorus up, and had some problems with cycling in the dairy herd. So I found out that you ask the plant what it wants. But I put that on. I found out what the plant wants, and I put that into the water. After the tank gets full, I energize that water for 7 minutes. Now, normally our water up there runs about 350 on general vitality. I neutralize this because it's got a lot of junk in it, like all water has. And then I put in what I want to put into water. Okay, I spray that on the field. The next cutting, I like to do exactly the same thing. After the first cutting, I like to have a farmer cut this in 28 days. I also like to have him watch the moon signs. Now, this is a little hard on some of these people because some of them don't quite go for that, and I used to think it was a bunch of baloney. Because I can remember a neighbor of ours always went by the moon signs on his garden, and my dad always said, you know, I plant my garden in the dirt, not in the moon. And so I was kind of trained that way. But anyway, the reason I like to go on the moon signs, if you will look, I get the new moon book and I get the calendar from BD people. But if you will look, it has days when you mow hay or cut anything that will retard growth. It also has a time when it will increase growth. And I checked this out. I checked it out by mowing my yard, and I checked it out by getting a haircut. And you can change tremendously by that. I mowed my yard one year. I started out in the increased growth stage, and I was mowing about every 5 days. And then then I tried it another time, and I switched, and it could go up to 2.5, 3 weeks. So there is something to it. So I like to have them follow that along with this. Then after that, they can decide if they want to put energies on or not. Now, when they decide maybe they don't want to pay that, I charge $5 an acre for spraying. If they don't want to pay that, then I take a picture of that field and I will energize that from my home. Well, I told Clarence the story, and he decided he would try some, and he was very dubious and he wasn't positive. But that year he told the boys, he said, instead of you mowing the hay this time, I want to mow hay. And I wished that I had a video of this. But anyway, he goes out and he starts around the first field, and he went about 3 rounds. And then he got off the tractor, and on his hands and knees, he went down the row to check. Because I had told him, if he follows this program, he won't have near as much browning of the lower leaves of the alfalfa, and they'll drop off. And after all, that's what you're raising for, is the leaves. So he was checking me out, and he found out that this was true. So anyway, he tried this, and he was very satisfied. To make a long story short, that year, as far as quality is concerned, that year when he started using this hay that we had done this way, he went from feeding 20 bales a day to feeding 11 bales a day. And I told this to a couple people, and they said, yeah, but he said, maybe the cattle didn't like it. I said, well, that may be. I don't know. But that year, with 61 or 62, I forget what it is, in his milking herd, he increased the production 77,000 pounds. That's over 1,000 pounds per cow for the year. So whether it was good or not doesn't really matter, because the results were good. Anyway, then I like to be sure in the fall go in and winterize it. Now, I use the instrument and the energies to winterize this. I think that you need to have additional growth in the roots, additional strength in the roots, and in order to carry that through the winter. We're in an area where it gets pretty cold, and sometimes it'll warm up and then freeze again, and we have a lot of heaving in the ground. And this will break the crown off the alfalfa and hurt the plant a lot. If the energy level is up high, it won't be as severe on it. So I like to get that energy level up. We had some raspberries at our place, and we have fall-bearing raspberries. And I've been able to get the energy level up high enough on them that we can take a frost and a freeze down to 22 degrees before it actually freezes them. So you can see what energy can do if you handle it the way it should be handled, the way that God intended it to be handled. So anyway, I like to winterize this because you need a good root stusher in order to go through the winter. On new seeding, I definitely like to go in as soon as the straw is off, or if they put it in the silo, either way, and follow basically the same program as I do on the other. And I definitely want to winterize it, because the new seeding needs extra attention because it's new, it doesn't have the development, and it seems to work much better and come through. If we get the man that takes that, oats off as silage rather than letting it mature and take the oats and combine and straw off, we can get 2 cuttings off of that new seeding the first year. And most generally, they don't get any off otherwise. So you can see that it does improve things. I was out in Pennsylvania working with a couple fellows, and one man was a real top-notch dairyman. And Melvin said, you know, the biggest problem I have is making high-quality hay. And he said, we a lot of times don't have time between the time we mow it and the time that we get it in the barn and we get a rain or something on it, and of course you know this hurts the quality. I said, well, let's use the instrument and dry it. Now, I had not done this before, but I know it could be done. So we took a picture of the sun, and I tell my customers, there's 3 things I want you to do in the first year that you're doing this. I want you to take a picture of the sun, try to get a day in maybe June or July when the sun is real hot, and take a picture direct into the sun. You can always use this. Another thing is in the spring when it's raining, I like to have you take a picture of that rain. And I want you to go out sometime when there's dew on the ground and get a sample of dew, because during the year you're going to use these. But anyway, I told Melvin, I said, let's try and dry that hay, and I think we can save maybe a day on it. And so we took and put a picture of the sun and put a picture of the field in there, and he did this. I told him now, I said, watch it, because I know you don't believe it's going to work, but if it does, it's going to be sooner than what you thought. And so he went out one noon and decided he was going to rake hay, and he checked it, and it was way too dry. So he waited till that evening till the dew come on a little bit and toughened it a little bit, and then he made the hay. What was interesting is 2 other neighbors had mowed the exact same time, and that night after he got done making hay, about midnight or so, it rained. And the other 2 neighbors had wet hay, and they couldn't figure out how he got his hay in the barn. And he was an Amishman, and he didn't want to tell them what he'd done, so they never did find out. I was over at Clarence's one day. When you think about these things on growth and regrowth and moon signs, I was over there one day, and Clarence had an operation on his foot, and he was sitting there by the picnic table out where I fill the sprayer, and his neighbor come over, and they were talking back and forth, and the neighbor had nitrate in the well. Of course, I'm always talking when I should be listening, so I says to him, I said, do you use anhydrous? And he said, yes. I said, then you deserve it. And so anyway, I was filling the tank, and I had the electric cord from my cab of my truck running up to the garage, so I had power for my unit. I got the tank full. I put my 5 gallons of basic H in, filled the tank with water, and then I proceeded to energize it. And as I went to the field, why, the neighbor says to Clarence, he says, how well do you know this fellow? Oh, Clarence says, I don't know, I just met him. Why? He says, oh, you better watch him. He said, I've watched him. I irritated him when I told him about the nitrogen as well, I think. But anyway, he said, you better watch him, because I saw him and he only put 5 gallons of fertilizer in that whole big tank. And he says, when you get the bill, you better see what he charged you for. Clarence says, I'll watch it. So anyway, this was on, I don't remember just what day it was on, probably a Wednesday or Thursday, but anyway, on Saturday, a friend of mine had asked me to put my spray truck in a parade for him, and so I did. And on the way back, I stopped at Clarence's to pick up some eggs. And I noticed that the alfalfa fields were all nice and green, and we hadn't had any rain, and we were kind of dry, and I said something to him. I said, boy, you must have got some rain. We didn't at home, where I live about 30 miles away. And he said, no, we didn't get any. But I said, well, those alfalfa fields sure look nice and green. He says, they really come back good, didn't they? I said, yes. So I didn't think anything more of it, and I went home, and the next Tuesday, he called me. And he said, can you come over? He says, I got something to show you that I think you'll like to see. And I said, okay. So I went over, and he said, Paul went out to the timber last night to get the cows. And when he was getting them, he looked over into the field, one of the fields that you had sprayed, and he couldn't believe how tall the alfalfa was. And so he pulled up some and brought it up. And they had measured this, and we had gotten 11-inch regrowth in 8 days. And I didn't know at the time, and so that's what made me think about some moon signs and things. So I got me an almanac, and I went back on things to see, and we did. We hit cycles just perfect. And so there is something to it. If I can get somebody to flip that thing over, I'll show you how you might be interested in how I energize the tank, the sprayer tank. I've got a 300-gallon spray tank and sprayer on a pickup truck. And what I do is I get the water from each one of the farmers. But the sprayer sits on a pickup truck. It's got a fiberglass tank, but it sits in a metal cradle. I put the instrument in my cab of the tractor, or of the truck, and then after the tank is full, I energize it. I got the idea, why wait the 7 minutes? Why don't you just energize it while you're filling? And I tried that, and I found out the energies go in the top and right back out the water hose, so you can't get anywhere. But I usually try to get this somewhere up around 3,000 to 3,200. That's what it usually comes up in the 7 minutes. Depends a little bit about what you're putting in there. I was to Randy Baker's one day. He had asked me to come over and talk about alfalfa because he had seen what we've been doing over to Mike Dietmaier's. And so he said he would spray, and so I was filling the tank and doing all this, and he come out from doing chores, and he come out to watch. And he said, what do you do? And so I was showing him, and I said, what, you have to be careful when you charge it. He said, why do you have the timer? Why do you charge it just for 7 minutes? I said, well, if you charge it for any longer than that, you're liable to get the energies up too high and you'll burn the hay. Now, when you are spraying water on hay and you tell a man you burn the hay, they're liable to laugh. And Randy did. He really laughed. And I didn't say anything. I thought, okay. And so I went out and sprayed his hay fields, and the last field was right next to the house. And the house sits back about 60 rods from the road. And so as I was coming down, I thought, well, the last pass, I'm going to make a double pass, which will be right next to the house. And so I did do that, and it burned it. And so I didn't say anything. I mean, you can't tell right then, but I knew it would. And so I went on home, and he didn't say anything. And in about 3 weeks or so, he called and said, I'm going to mow hay. I want you to spray again. I said, fine. We set a time when it would be, and as long as it didn't rain, well, we could stick by those times. So I went over and was loading up, and so they got done milking, and here he and the hired man come out. And the hired man was asking about this, and he had heard about it. Randy had told him a little bit about it. So he said, Randy was explaining it to him, and I was just standing there listening and filling the tank, and so I'm doing that. And Randy come to the place where he said, and if you aren't careful, you can burn it. And I kind of got a chuckle at that, and the hired man just, ha, 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 Well, he said, you can laugh if you want, but he says, you remember that browning on that one strip next to the house last time? And he said, yeah. Well, he said, I laughed at this. And he said, so Gene burned it, and not only that, but he charged me for it. So you do have to be careful with these things and do things right. I had another experience that I did something I didn't know anything about, is I stopped over at Bob Knoller's one day, and I got out of the truck and started into the barn, and you could just smell that there was hot hay. And I saw Bob coming, and I said, man, what are you doing, making silage in the hay mow? And he said, boy, don't talk to me. I've been up all night long. And he says, my barn's going to burn down. And I says, what's the matter? Well, he said, my hired man and my brother made hay the 3rd of July. It wasn't quite ready, and they should have waited till the 4th, but they didn't want to work on the 4th, so they put it in and didn't say anything to me. And on the 5th, they put dry hay in on top. And now, look what I got. And he says, And if the barn would have burnt, I mean, he milks 120 cows. He had a freestall barn. He had the regular stanchion barn, and the hay barn was all in a close, pretty near tied together vicinity. If one would have went, they'd all went. So anyway, he said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I said, let's go look at it. So we went back and looked at this hay, and I was thinking all the time, I mean, what can we do? And so I said, boy, if we could get a rod to run down in there, we could tell what's going on. Well, he says, it's not that simple. He says, they blew the hay, they chopped it and blew it over a beam. So he says, I got 2 piles. And I said, we need 2 rods. So he took some heavy wire bracing off of a wire gate. They were about 18, 19 feet long, and run those down in there. He put an electric wire around the top and brought it down to my instrument. And so I took a general vitality of it, and it was 900. And I said, boy, that's hot. I didn't know if that was hot, if that was good, what it was, but I knew it shouldn't have been 900. And so I said, you know, why don't we I've got a picture of the sun, let's put that in there and dry that out. Well, I don't know if you know anything about spontaneous combustion or not, but that's a slow way of doing things. But I knew that, but I didn't know what else to do. So that's what we did. And I told him, I said, I'll go home and I'll be back tomorrow. And I'll bring my beam projector tomorrow and leave it on here because I said I got to have my analyzer for spraying, and I'll spray tomorrow. And of course, it was about 65 miles away, but I thought, well, we got to save that barn. So I went home, and all the way home, I got to think, what can I do, put in there to stop that thing from heating up? Well, Dr. Whittaker came up with some material that is used in fresh ground corn in the fall to keep it from molding and heating. And I thought, well, now, that has got to be something that'll stop bacterial action. So I got a little vial. I had some of that, and I got a little vial of that. Went back the next day, and we put the sun and this vial in there, and we run it for about a week. I don't just remember. I've got some handouts back there on the table that you can see the results of. But the first day was 900, and I think 2 days later was 750, and then it come down to 600 and something. But at least it was coming down, and we saved that barn, which Bob was pretty happy about. So even though now when Sarah and Galen had sold me this equipment, they didn't tell me that I could do that. So I had another man down in central Illinois that had bought some equipment, and I was telling him some of the things I had been doing. And so one day he and his son were out in the barn, and they were working, and the cattle around there seemed to be real restless for some reason or other. And they went outside, and they were just tearing around. There were some paper bags that they had when they planted corn that they didn't burn. They were blowing around and kind of spooked the cattle. And so they got rid of the bags, but the cattle seemed to be still restless. And the next day they were more restless. I don't know why, but they were. In fact, when Joe started out of the barn, he was just in time to see the cattle riled up real bad. He heard them running around, so he started out of the barn, and they broke through the gate, and away they went. And so they didn't know what they were going to do. Well, they got them rounded up and brought back, and so Norman says, well, there's something I'd like to try. He took a picture of those cattle, and he treated them with 7735, which is God's love. And I'm not sure how long he treated them. I don't know those details, but he treated them with that, and he said by the next day, he said the cattle were laying around the lot, and you could go sit on them, and they were just as docile as could be. And he said, boy, he couldn't wait to tell me that. We put a meeting on down in Champaign, and I hadn't heard about this, and he said, I was telling some of these things, and you know, everybody was real leery. You can tell these people that look at you like you're out of your mind. And Norman says, can I tell a story of what happened to my cattle? And I told him yes, and I was real surprised. Anyway, that's what happened, and it worked. So I was up in Dorchester, Iowa, to a registered Jersey breeder, and they had got some equipment, and they had a big dairy and a lot of farm, and they weren't able to take a class, so I went up there to do the training right on their own farm. There was 2 brothers and a father, and the one brother was more interested than the other one, but the one that wasn't too interested would come in and out, and of course he got just a touch of things, and he was pretty leery. And that night we went out to the barn. Well, it was the second night, I guess. We went out to the barn, and they had tie stalls for these cattle instead of stanchion stuff, so they had more freedom. And they had all these cattle in the tie stalls, and they were milking. And over in the box stall over in the corner, they had this young heifer that had just come in. And Keith went in to milk her, and of course he had her in a stanchion in the box stall. And when he went in, why, he put his hand there, you know, and just eased up to that cow and up to the heifer. And I said, "What's the matter?" Well, he says, "She'll kick your head off." He says, "She's terrible." He said, "I don't know what we're going to do." And so I watched him, and after we got done milking, I said to Leo, I said, "You know, we can fix that heifer up." I said, "Keith is skeptical and don't believe in this at all." And I said, "Let's teach him a lesson." So we decided to take a picture of the heifer and treat her with God's love, the 7735. And so we did. And I went home that day, and I kind of forgot about it. 2 days later, Leo called me, and he says, "I got to tell you what happened to the heifer." He says, "Keith can't believe what happened." He says, "We've got her now in the tie stalls. She acts like one of the old cows, and nothing, no trouble at all." And he said that really was a good thing, because he says now at least Keith is a believer. So another thing that happened on that farm that's kind of interesting, it has nothing to do with agriculture, but it does have some interest, is Keith's wife was baking a cake one day, and their little boy was just learning to walk. And when she opened the oven door, she pulled the rack out, she took the cake out and was putting it on the table. The little guy gets up and he touches the rack and just burned his hand something terrible. And man, she just picked him up, and he was hollering and screaming. And so she puts him in the car, was going to take him to the doctor. And as she put him in the car, why, she saw Leo, and she told him what happened, hollered across the yard and told him what happened. Leo went upstairs to where his instrument was and put the little boy on it. By the time they got to the doctor, which they're probably out of town about 4 miles, the time they got to the doctor, there was no swelling, there was no pain, and the little boy, you could see some marks, but it wasn't bad. By that afternoon, the little boy was using his hand with these trucks and cars and stuff and playing. Another thing that happened is Leo's dad went to the doctor, and the doctor said, "You got to go to the hospital." I don't remember what the problem was. And Leo's mother called him. By the time they went to the hospital in Leclerc, which is, I don't know, probably 60, 70 miles away. Anyway, by the time they got there, they checked him in, and they said, "You know, the doctor must have made a mistake, because there's nothing wrong with you." So he came home. And so there can be things done with these if you will believe it and do it. I had been talking to different farmers about the cosmic pipes and so on, and I talked to one farmer a few times, and he kind of wanted to, but he was a little leery, and so he called me one day, and he said, "Say, come over." He said, "If your equipment will do what you say it'll do, and if it'll do what I want it to do, I'm interested." So I went over. This man lived at Rock City. He had the champion top producing cow of Stevenson County. It was a grade cow, but it still was a good cow. And this was 1st of April. In February, this cow had gotten sick. He had called the veterinarian, and the veterinary said, "I think she's got leukemia." So they drew blood, they sent it to the laboratory, and found out definitely it was leukemia. So he told him, the cow's going to die, and so, do whatever they wanted to ovulate her and get as many eggs as they could and breed heifers and stuff so they get some offspring. And so Dean says, "What can you do?" I said, "I don't know, but I'd sure like to try." And so we changed the diet a little bit. We added some hydrogen peroxide into it, because one thing about sickness and things like this, you're usually short of oxygen. And I figured, can't hurt anything. So we did this, and then we worked on her with the anapathic instrument about every 3rd day. I'd put her in there and run her on that. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, that fall I told Dean, I said, you know, when you go, and I'm sure she'll be a top winning cow again this year, because she was down 50 pounds on butterfat that year, but she produced 107 pounds more milk than she did the year before, even though she'd been sick for several months. And I said, if you win and you go up to get your trophy this year, I'm not going to be there. I don't know what you're going to tell these people, because everybody knows that red cow died, had to die. So then we had a pig roast to have these people come together and tell what they had done, and some of the new ones could hear. And there was one couple that was kind of late coming. And so when they got there, I was kidding them about being late, and he said, well, we went to church, and when we got home, he said, I had a cow having a calf, and she had a little trouble, so I had to help her. I said, well, okay, and so no problem. So the next day we went out to see these people, and we stopped at this farm, and Larry says, you know, he says, that cow didn't clean. Can you clean the cow with the instrument? I said, sure, no problem. And so I said, go out and get a Q-tip specimen, and we'll see what we can do. So he did, and brought it in, and we run it on the analyzer, and the GV was only 50. And I thought, boy, that's terrible low. But, you know, all of us were sitting around the table and talking, and how, you know, you weren't really thinking about what you're supposed to be doing. And so I run it again, it was still 50, and so we put it in the antipathy. We brought it up to about 450. And so then we left, and we were going to go down in Iowa the next day and do some work. And so I told him, I said, well, now, I said, I'll be back on Wednesday. I said, have your checkbook ready, because you're going to buy this, so I'll be ready. So anyway, I left. When I come back on Wednesday, I pulled in, and I said, well, did the cow clean? And he says, no. I thought, boy. I said, well, it takes a little longer, you know. And Marianne says, why don't you tell him what you did? And Larry says, well, I'll tell you what. He says, when I went out to get that specimen of the cow, he said, I didn't do that. He said, when we got home from the pig roast, we found out this heifer had twins, and the one was about dead. And he said, I got a specimen of that calf, and I had it all registered why the GV was only 50, because it was about dead. Marianne says, I want you to come over here to the they had crates outside for the calves. She said, I'll show you the twin calves, and you tell me which one was sick. And you couldn't tell it. This was 3 days later, and you couldn't tell. They both were jumping around there, feeling real good. So we went down to Iowa to talk to these people, and we got down there and found out that this man, he raised a lot of hogs, and he'd had a sow down for 2 days. So we were talking to him, and he kind of wanted the equipment, but he couldn't make up his mind. And the way I met this fellow, he'd bought some cosmic pipes from Lakemont before, and he wanted them checked out, and I happened to be down there when he called one day, and I said, well, I'll come down, and that's how I got acquainted with him. So we went back down to show him what we had, and he couldn't make up his mind. And I said, you know, I said, Jim, how did you ever buy those pipes? I mean, you're having a hard time making up your mind then. Well, he says, Dad's the one to decide. I said, then get your dad in here. He's the guy I want to talk to then, if he's the one that makes up his mind. So anyway, his dad come in, and in the conversation he got in, he says, Jim, he said, you know you got a sow down there in barn number such and such that can't get up. And Jim says, yeah, she's been that way for 2 days. And I said, well, go down and get a specimen of her, and we'll work on her. Maybe we can help her. So he did, and we come back, and we run it a couple times, brought her vitality up, and then just before we were ready to leave, well, he wanted to show us his hog setup. And so we went down there, and this old sow had got up on her front feet, and she was just sitting there looking. And they were going to go get her up, and I said, well, wait a minute, let's just put a little feed out here and see if we can't entice her to get up on her own. And we did, and all she'd do is sit there and wrinkle her nose, you know. I mean, she's like, man, she was lazy. And so she didn't want to get up. Well, Mr. Miller went in, and he swatted her on the rear end. She got right up, and she moved right ahead and started eating. And went back up then to the house, and Jim had said he wanted the equipment, but he couldn't do it right then. They wanted to wait till they sold hogs. And he had said, we don't have as many as what we thought. We don't know. We got to see how things come out. And I said, okay. So we got in the car and got ready to leave, and Jim says, just a minute. He says, I want to go in and get a check. I said, check for what? Well, he says, Dad counted the pigs, and he wants that equipment right away. so he did evidently see something. Back again to my friend Clarence. He had a stock tank that he used to run the water through the milk cooler out in the stock tank. This helped cool without using as much electricity. Anyway, this stock tank was like a lot of stock tanks on farms. It was a big cement tank. It had 7 inches of algae on the bottom, had 5 inches of algae on the side, and enough on the top that the cows would have to root their nose around to get water, and you can imagine how much they would drink. And so I told him I wanted it cleaned out, and then we'd see if we could keep it clean. Well, he never got around to cleaning it out. We took a beam projector and set it in the window, put a little box around, set it in the window, run a wire out, and use just hydrogen peroxide to put in that water. And in 30 days, we had that water clear enough that you could drop a dime in there and you could see it go. I told this to my friend Mark Moeller, and he had a neighbor that had a pond that had a lot of algae on it. And so they went out, and it was so bad they had to push the boat through the pond. They went out and put two copper pipes down on each side of the pond and run a wire across, run a wire back to the instrument. And they were able to clean theirs up in 28 days. Mark says, "Are you sure it took 30 days? I said, "Well, I don't know why." Well, he says 28 days is a moon cycle, and I think you can do it in a moon cycle, because we did ours in a moon cycle. And so that's what he did. I was telling this to Roman, Stolfus, and Lucy about it, and they didn't do anything for 2 years. Here, about last fall, Lucy called me, and she said, "You know, we started to clean up our pond like you told us to, and we killed the fish." I said, "Well, what did you do?" I said, "You did something I didn't tell you to." Well, we set it up, and they set it up like that, and we turned it on, and we just let it on. I said, "For how long?" "Oh, probably a couple months." I said, "That isn't what I told you." Anyway, they killed some fish, and so I told them what they should do, and so they had another pond. They were going to try it, and it worked in the other pond. So there's a lot of things that you can do. Clarence doesn't have equipment because I do too much work for him for nothing. Anyway, if he has a cow that has mastitis, he'll call me. I've got all of his specimen of all of these cattle, and he called me, and I can work on them from my home. And he didn't believe this at first. Then we took one of the alfalfa fields and we split it. We actually physically sprayed one half, and the other half I used the instrument on. And I had about a 5-day advantage there, because when they mowed hay, I started on it right away. And the side that we did it with the instrument outproduced the other side by about 2 bales per acre, which is not big, but at least it shows it works. Well, anyway, he called one day and he said, "I got 5 cows that all had mastitis this morning." I said, "Well, what's wrong?" "Well, what'd you change?" Of course, you know, he's a true farmer. Nothing changed. And anyway, so I went over and I checked. He had gotten some feed in, and I checked it, and we always cleaned up all his feed. I think everybody should clean up, whether it's your groceries or feed, water, air, everything. You need to clean it. We found a lot of chemical poison in it. We cleaned that up, and within a few days, the herd was back to normal. I had another man that had turkeys. He had 10,000 in a house. He had split it in 2, and the one side was doing a little better than the other. And he came up to learn about the equipment a little bit, and he brought a picture along. He said, "I want to work on these turkeys." In fact, I opened the door, say hello, and he shoves this picture. "I want you to work on these turkeys." And so we did. He was there for about 3 days, and we worked on the turkeys. And his hired man called up the night before he was to come home, and he said, "Boy, you can't believe what's happened." He thought they all died, you know. But he said, "No," he says, "the side that you took a picture of was the worst side," and he says, "Now they're the better side." And when Edward got home, he called me about 10 that night, and he said, "Boy," he said, "you just can't believe the health of those turkeys." His son-in-law lives in Pennsylvania, and probably the 3rd batch of turkeys he's ever raised in his life, he cleaned the feed each time, and he was able to put 4.5 to 5 pounds more on the turkeys in the same number of days. And he had less mortality and less throwouts butchering time, and some of the old timers that had been raising turkeys for a long time come over and ask what this young kid was doing, that he could beat them, and so there is something to it. On Edwards, we decided he had been using a lot of medicines and stuff, and we decided, I talked him into doing one batch without any medication. We put a pipe into where we could put a crystal and program that crystal at worming time. We wormed those turkeys from my house, and I told him, I says, you better, they're all on contract and everything. I says, buy your wormer so the guy don't get suspicious. And I said, at the end of the time when you sell him, I said, he'll take it back. Because he says he's going to see what happened. Well, Edward couldn't wait that long. He had to tell him about 2/3 of the way through, and the guy was just about had a heart attack. We hadn't wormed those turkeys with stuff he had sold him. But they found out that there were hardly any worms at all in those turkeys when he butchered, and even though they wormed them with medication, they had worms. And we saved him the last 6 weeks of feeding him. We saved him over $6,500 worth of feed, and he had heavier turkeys. So there's a lot of things, and I've got some flyers back there on the table that tell about some of these crazy things I've done. And so if you'd like to know more about it, well, stop by. And I'm going to open it up now for questions, because I feel that if you got questions and they don't get answered, why, you haven't learned as much as you should. Has anybody got it? Yes. I took, on my dairy cattle and those, I use a Q-tip. I put it in their mouth, get a saliva, and then and be sure not when they're eating and that, I mean, when their mouth is clean as can be, and then put it in a little vial. Now, you don't dare cork that little vial till that dries, and it takes a couple weeks where there's not much air running around there. Because if you cork it early, it'll mildew, and then it's no good. Then I use that. As long as that cow's living, why, you can do this. And I pregnancy check cows against what the vet did. We've had very good results, and it's a whole lot better than going into that cow, the pregnancy checker. I always figured if you're supposed to be in that cow, God would have made her with a zipper. You know. Yes?
What are the days of the lunar cycle for increased growth or for less growth?
I can't tell you what they are, but in the New Moon book it tells you, and you can get it from Llewellyn, and they've got an 800 number if you want to call them, and the 800 number is 800 New Moon. And you can ask for it. It's $3.95. They'll probably charge you $1 or so to ship it to you, but it's a good book. Was there a question over here? Any other questions? Yes.
The University of Florida did a sample of growing alfalfa in Florida. They grew the finest alfalfa you could ever imagine, but they couldn't harvest it. It's too damp.
It's too damp.
Wet. Everybody who has farm animals in Florida and they want good alfalfa, we get it out of the Midwest or Canada or New Mexico. Now, do you think there's a possibility that you could get this hay dry enough to store? Now, that's the other thing. If we store it, we order hay frequently.
Yeah.
So that you don't have this damp.
I'm not sure if you could, because I know your soil is all put in here on top of water, and you might have the water table may be too high, but it'd be worth a try. Don't cost much to try it, you know, with a small amount. Yes. I use three things. I use the chemical poison rate, the metallic poison rate, and the mineral imbalance to clean out the stuff out of the livestock feed, or even if the fellow's not using chemicals himself, because you're going to get a lot from the air and the water and neighbors and all that. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The good thing, if you want to see what's in your water when it rains, take 2 glasses, put one out in the open and one under a tree or a bush, and when it rains, then test it. The one outside will have all kinds of crap in it, and the one under the tree will filter this out and it'll be clean. Way back.
Cosmic pipes.
Pardon?
You said something about cosmic pipes. What are they?
Well, cosmic pipe is an energy instrument that draws cosmic energy in and radiates out through the soil. And the reason we need those, and like Jerry's towers of power, is because we've got such a smog layer above the earth, we don't get the cosmic energy that we used to have. In the spring, after the winter, your energy level of the soil will be up here pretty good. And all through the year, as things grow, it'll go down, even though the cosmic energy is coming in. With these two things, then it holds it up to a higher level. If you're in a higher level, your health will be better, your balance will be better, all of it. Okay, one more question.
You mentioned Basic H. Will you tell us what kind of fertilizer Basic H is?
Basic H is not a fertilizer. It's actually a household cleaner put out by the Shakti Corporation that they use for soil conditioner. And it helps clean up the ground too, but it works. It'll open up the soil. It breaks the surface tension. When you have soil and it rains, the soil will repel the water because there's a tension, surface tension on it. This helps break that. So take your pen. Okay, one more. I use 2 quarts the acre on growing crops. You can use up to as much as a gallon per acre on ground, but not on a growing crop. 2 quarts is, I put in 15 to 20 gallon, depending on, I used to use 20 gallon, then I turned it to 15 because I can get 20 acres out of a tank load then. Okay, that's all the questions, but I've got a question for you. And you don't have to answer this out loud. But in this troubled world that we live in, are you part of the problem or part of the solution? Thank you.